So welcome to the latest episode of You Are My Boro with me, Scott Wilson, and Dom Shaw from the Northern Echo. We're going to look back on what was another great weekend for Boro. Another big home win, this time over QPR, that saw Boro close the gap to second place Sheffield United. It's getting tight up there. We'll have a little talk about how the league table is looking. And obviously a rare blank week this week for Boro. So we'll talk about what might be happening at Rockcliffe Park this week, and we'll also touch on the season ticket release news that's obviously hit a few of the headlines today. But I'll start by saying hello to Dom. Hi, Dom.
Hey, Scott, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And you were our man at the Riverside on Saturday, and you get to see what was another pretty polished Boro performance, wasn't it? It took them a little bit of time to get going in the first half, but certainly second half, they purred again, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Right from the off in the second half, McGree at the post, like 2 minutes or a minute or two in the second half. And that was it, really. It set the tone. Carrick said afterwards that from that moment onwards, immediately at the start of the second half, he could almost see that it had kind of clicked. And not for the first time. Yeah, I can think of 5 or 6 games where you go in at half time and you wonder whether he's going to be tempted to change it. And he doesn't, and it's kind of one of those where, well, what do I know? Because 10 minutes in the second half, it's
everything's right and great, isn't it?
Yeah, and the second half was just kind of the Boro we expected, and obviously saw off Neil Critchley because he's gone, and I've seen tonight that Gareth Ainsworth is the man they've approached.
Which is a bit of heavy metal at Loftus Road, which will be interesting.
I felt a little bit for Critchley. I've seen a lot worse teams. I know, the 10 games without a win, and that's, that looks after itself, doesn't it? I've seen a lot worse teams at the Riverside, and you do,
Well, I know we touched
the rotted seemingly set in before he went in there, I think. But
obviously I was down there the week before with Sunderland, and as we touched on the last video cast, it just felt like a club that had made their minds up. Do you know what I mean? Certainly in terms of the fans, that they just weren't having it with the way things are going. And so it didn't really surprise me when that news broke quite quickly after the Boro game. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to Tuba again in a minute, but firstly, having said, you almost certainly won't make any changes, there's our inside knowledge out there. So anyone who thought they were tuning into this for the real cutting edge inside knowledge, that was thrown completely out the window when the changes came. I mean, Michael Carrick made the changes, and to be fair to him, he'll come away having thought, well, that's worked an absolute treat, won't he?
Yeah, we actually had a section on here dedicated to, is Dale Fry now back in the team for good? In which I said yes, only for the day later to bring him to lose his place.
He's out.
Yeah, it's it like we said last week. We did. I know we were kind of leaning towards him naming an unchanged team, but we did also say, didn't we, that when you have got a squad and you keep talking about the depth of the squad, at some point you do have to back that up and actually play the players, and you keep saying you've got all the trust in, and he did. And Barlaser, I thought Ramsey was Boro's brightest in the first half. And Barlaser was a bit rusty in the first half, but that's to be expected, isn't it? His first start. But in the second half, I thought he kind of helped set the tempo, really. And obviously it was his cross that for the opening goal. That's his 8th assist of the season, which takes him top of the championship charts. And I think it just does show again. You look at that bench at the weekend, and who's missing from the bench. It's almighty strong
squad, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. You say about Ramsey there. I mean, he's obviously a very different type of option to force, isn't he?
He's a natural winger, or that's what strikes me. Yeah. He kind of, he looks at home on that side. That said, when Force was at Blackburn away, when Force first went out there, and
I think it was.
I'm not sure about this in the first 15, 20 minutes, but I think he's made a real success of that. And
he really has, yeah.
I know we've only seen, however many minutes of Ramsey one start. I still think if Michael Carrick had to name his strongest 11 tomorrow, then Force would undoubtedly be in on that right side. Because, I mean, he scored goals as well, hasn't he? I haven't got the numbers to hand, but he was 4 in 6 or something. pretty
That's
prolific.
the interesting thing, because you're right. Force probably looks more of a goal-scoring threat because he's still got that striker's instinct. His instinct is probably to come inside and either link up with Archer or get a shot away. Whereas you're right, Ramsey probably is more focused on getting the ball into the middle, feeding those players. So I guess it's how Carrick wants to see his side set up and what he feels is the most important strength.
And for me, McGree, again, I know we touched on it at some point last week, but in the second half especially, McGree was just just kind of made Boro tick, really. It was the little intricate passing and just popping up in those pockets of space. I just don't think teams know how you get a grip of him, because he's got such a free role, really, hasn't he? He's made such a success of it.
He's got great movement, hasn't he? And I mean,
and vision as well.
This last second link up with Matt Crooks that he seems to have got going on is, it seems like every week at the minute, Crook comes off the bench, sets up McGree. There's a goal in the 90th minute to make it 3-1.
I know, because it was one of them where 2-0, match report was written, game over, and then Cher does that. Obviously, Zach Steffen won't want to see again. And then Boro go up the other end. But it felt really comfortable in the second half. It was just what we said, isn't it? In the end, kind of, you want one of those no fuss wins that Boro should have. And in the end, that was exactly what it was. And in front of a big crowd again, that kind of weight of expectation and the pressure. Because Dan Barlaser was adamant that he didn't know the Sheffield United result. Carrick kind of didn't say one way or the other, but I'm not having that. They've got to win more, haven't they?
I'm not either. Which leads us nicely, actually, into the league table. So as you quite rightly say, Sheffield United had lost to Millwall, which we kind of said that was a tricky one for them. And Boro took full advantage of it. And so the gap is now down to 4 points, albeit, of course, Sheffield United still have that game in hand. But from a point where, even just 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were saying, well, it's there in the background, but let's be honest, it's not going to happen. Now it is bang on, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels that way, doesn't it? 4 points. If Sheffield United will undoubtedly now be well aware, won't they, of Boro kind of coming breathing down the necks, and I just think having come up against Boro when Boro was so good last week, they'll be aware of Boro coming, and they'll know how good Boro are or how good Boro are playing at the minute. I think there's that extra pressure, and 4 points now. There's a game in hand, and they win that game in hand. That's 7, and it's a big buffer. But we've seen, haven't we? This time last week it was 10 points. We've seen how quickly it can turn. And it, like you say, it feels now like it's genuinely on. And I think the two major contributing factors on Saturday to the kind of scruffy first half were A, fatigue from Wednesday night, and B, the fact that it was a slightly changed team. But you do wonder as well whether it was almost kind of that, maybe trying a little bit too hard to make it click, given that they suddenly were aware of this
the chance
opportunity to take
there.
advantage.
Those numbers,
just what Carrick said, kind of, at half time, just play your own game. We don't need to change anything. Kind of so relaxed, and then felt immediately saw the immediate impact at the start of the second half. But it's absolutely on now, isn't it? No doubt about it. It almost felt a couple of weeks ago like, are we doing the classic media thing by talking something up that
isn't really there? Yeah.
Whereas now, it's an absolute conversation to be had. Isn't it?
I mean, those numbers scrolling along the bottom, actually, clearly the gap between Sheffield United and Boro has been the big focus of things. But for me, two things that also stand out. One, all of a sudden, the 7-point gap that Boro put between themselves and Luton now, which has opened up, very quickly. But then second as well, Burnley, 72, 11 points clear at the top of the table. I mean, we'll come back to Boro again in a minute, but just for a second, I mean, they've been incredible this season, really, because I think I've said this before, of the 3 teams that came down in the summer, it felt to me like Burnley were the ones in the biggest sense of chaos. That, players were leaving, obviously a change of manager, the whole Dyche thing, had come to an end. It felt like they were the team that had the potential to really take a lot of time and struggle. and that Watford and Norwich were your yo-yo clubs who would slip seamlessly back into the Championship and probably finish first and second. And again, that shows, what do I know? Because, you know, the complete opposite. You've got Burnley running away with it. You've got Watford and Norwich scrambling around just to try and make the playoffs.
And the thing is, for a large wedge of like the first third of the season, you had pundits and a fair few managers talking about how this Championship's different because there's no standout team. And Tony Mowbray said it a lot, didn't he? Where he said, you know, this Championship, there doesn't feel like there's a Fulham, for example, from last year. And yet, you look at Burnley now. What's the record? 106 points, is it? Without doing the maths of how many games they've got left, but
they're on a sensational run, aren't they?
How many games have they got left, Burnley? What have they played? Have they played?
They've played one less than Borough. They played the same number of games as United.
So there's what? I'm trying to do my maths here off the top of my head.
14 games left, 14-3. So put me at 42. They can get another 42, I have it at.
Yeah.
So that would be 100.
That takes it 114.
114 in theory.
Yeah, we should have planned this before, shouldn't we?
Shouldn't we?
I mean, look, I think they're going to blow through 100 points.
Which is incredible, isn't it?
It is, like you say, when you consider everything that was going on there at the start of the season, and the fact
and the players that they lost, to be fair to them, you know, Pope, Tarkowski, McNeil. I know McNeil went a bit earlier, didn't he? I think, but you know, some big names came out of that team in the wake of relegation, and he's done a really good job company.
I think back to when Woodgate took charge of Borough and kind of the realisation early doors of perhaps he'd underestimated just how difficult it is to change a style of a team when he wanted to kind of change a Tony Pulis team into a football team. You think of how long that Burnley team have been embedded. I know it's different players, but being embedded into that Sean Dyche style for Vincent Kompany to come in and to change the way they play, because I think they're a decent team to watch. Yeah, fair play to them. They're gone, aren't they? They're absolutely
gone. Yeah, I mean, it certainly does feel like Burnley will win it. Sheffield United or Borough will finish second. Clearly, we hope it's Borough. And then, as per usual, the rest of the playoff positions will be an absolute almighty scramble. I mean, do you think Sunderland will get in? Do you think Sunderland will finish there?
I from what I've seen, I do.
I do. I think just the fact that they score goals will be enough to mean that they'll pick up enough points between now and the end, I think.
Yeah. I think, as I say this, I wasn't at Burnley when Borough played there. You were. And even now, counting Sheffield United, Sunderland are the best team I've seen Borough play this year. That day at Stadium of Light. I think on the day now, it's a very young team, isn't it? There's the inconsistencies there, but I think there's every chance Sunderland.
I mean, that Burnley game was a 15-minute spell, really. For Burnley. For Burnley. For a big chunk of the game, there wasn't an awful lot in it. If anything, Borough were probably the better side. And then in 15 minutes, Burnley just went bang, bang, bang. Obviously, a couple of scrappy goals. Obviously, the Howson kind of one that flicked in and flicked into the net stands out. But it wasn't a 90-minute performance really from Burnley in the way that you're right. Probably Sunderland against Borough was more. Admittedly, against 10 men, you've got to couch it with that. Obviously, with Dale, with Dale sending off, that clearly, that has to be part of the conversation. But I think most Borough fans would probably concede that even, without Dale doing what he did and all that happening, Sunderland were probably the more threatening side for most of that game. But it's the one, as we keep on saying, it's the one and only time really Borough have let themselves down, isn't it? Under Carrick, which is, incredible really, considering how many games he's had now.
Yeah, and I think just as impressive as, going and beating Sheffield United in the form they did is avoiding the slip up, because the kind of typical Borough fear of Blackburn at home Blackpool at home and Cardiff away and QPR at home. Yeah, Borough have made light work of all of them really. And Carrick afterwards in the press conference was as relaxed as I've seen him. He's never uptight, is he? God,
no.
at all. But he was the most relaxed and kind of jovial I've seen him.
Yeah.
And almost laughed off our attempts to get him talking about Sheffield United. He actually said on the way out,
quite good at deflecting that, isn't he?
Yeah.
Quite good. Yeah. They're gonna have to overtake them before he'll even come.
Oh, yeah.
And even then he'll find a way of dodging it, I think.
Yeah. Although I thought fair play to Dan Barlaser for his honesty when he said, with Rotherham last year, we were away and gone, and we ended up scraping over the line on the last day of the season. And he said, I'd absolutely rather be having been in now both positions. He said, I'd much rather be the chaser.
Yeah, which is an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Let's before we wrap up, and by the way, if you're enjoying this, please do like, subscribe, and comment. We're going to be doing another video on Friday. So if you've got any questions or any topics you want us to discuss, then give us a shout. Hopefully, we'll have a special guest on Friday along with us, and we'll be able to do that later in the week. But do subscribe. We're on YouTube. But as I say, before we wrap up, let's talk season tickets. Boro have announced the early bird season ticket details today. The prices are going up. And obviously, that has not gone down particularly well amongst some fans, understandably so. The club released a few comments along with it, basically saying, look, our costs have gone up like the rest of the world. With FFP, what we bring in has a direct impact on what goes out. If we want to support this club, then we need to raise the revenue and we need to cover the costs. A personal view is that I can perfectly see both sides of it. I can see Boro's argument. I mean, let's be honest, everything in the world is going up at the minute, isn't it? We all know what inflation's at the moment. We all know that energy costs are going through the roof, et cetera, et cetera. So I can understand that the club will feel they need to claw some of that back. But I can also understand fans saying, look, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We live in one of the poorest regions in the world. We want to support this football club. The more prices go up, the harder it becomes to do that. I mean, where do you sit with it, Dom?
100%. There's always that kind of middle balance, isn't it? I think first things first, it kind of key to point out that the club would never take a decision like this lightly. It's something that, has been discussed at length. And in an ideal world, they absolutely wouldn't do that, would they? Like you say there, that there's the rising costs that, at a tough time like it is at the minute, nobody needs the extra hit of having to fork out that little bit more for anything. But like you said there, that the costs are rising at the club as well, aren't there? There's FFP, the need to comply with FFP, obviously. While also, let's just look back at last year's accounts. Losses were down, but there were still £19 million. It's a staggering amount, isn't it? And in that report, and it kind of words to the same effect every year. The biggest risk to the club is failing to perform competitively in the league in which it competes. This is managed by developing and recruiting a first-team squad suited to the relevant league and employing a management team. The club will continue to strive for promotion and progression and promotion to the Premier League. That's the other thing. But Boro still want to improve on the pitch. They still want to be able to go to Michael Carrick and give him money to strengthen his squad for next season, whether that's in the Championship or the Premier League. So I completely understand it. Red Faction had made their feelings known with a statement last week and a banner at the Riverside on Saturday. Sympathise with fans, but also completely understand the club's decision. And like I say, it's not something that they certainly wouldn't want to do that, would they? It's not a decision that they've taken lightly. And the other thing, I think Michael Carrick, unprompted at every opportunity, is going out of his way, isn't he, to hail the fans and say how big a part they've played this season. Unprompted. That's not something that he's kind of that's not something that he's asked to talk about. He does it before.
There's no doubt that certainly the away followings have grown massively since Carrick came. And the numbers that Boro now are just routinely taken to each and every away game. It has to have a positive impact in terms of the team and the way things are going. Gates obviously starting to creep up at the Riverside as well. And the reality is that while at the very top end of the Premier League, the amount of match day revenue that is raised, is becoming, I hate to say inconsequential, but it's becoming a much smaller part of the pie when put against global TV deals, etc., etc. The reality of life, even in the Championship, certainly in Leagues 1 and 2, but even in the Championship, is that match day revenue still makes a big difference, doesn't it? It's still a big, big driver, as you saw from the COVID.
In the COVID season, yeah. I was going to say, because that was obviously was it 30 million to just under 31 million, the losses the year before that. And the attendance was at 27.5, just under 27,500 on Saturday, which might well Sunderland and the first home game of the season and Boxing Day,
I think
comfortably the highest. And when you look at the numbers before Carrick came in, 23,000, so the success. But again, the timing, this is the time of year, but this week was planned to be the week when Boro put those prices out. It's not like they've put it out on the back of the wings and tried to creep it out while Boro on a high on the pitch. This was always going to be the week in which those prices were announced. So there's nothing there. So like you said at the start, they kind of sympathise with fans, but equally understand the club's position and decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, as I say, that wraps us up for another edition of You Are My Boro. We'll be back on Friday when we'll be looking ahead to the game at the weekend. Obviously, West Brom, another big one for Boro. And as I say, between now and then, if you have got any questions, any topics, then either comment below the video on YouTube, or you can tweet myself and Dom. You can even write us a letter. These things still exist. The Northern Egg will write us a letter, and we'll get back to you, and we'll try and touch on all of them on Friday. So up until now, enjoy your week, and we'll see you on Friday for more You Are My Boro.